What do you believe in? God, mercy, karma, power, conquest? One of the central questions around Daredevil as a character has always been, how willing are you to scrutinize that faith? How willing are you to investigate the things that give you purpose? What do these beliefs do to you and the people around you? How far are you willing to go for what you believe in? No matter what it is, there will always be people who are so willing to commit that it weighs them down. Some might let that baggage weigh down the people around them as well, or maybe there will be some people who take it a step further and just entirely offload that baggage onto the people around them. Hell, we have people whose commitment to an idea is so superficial that they really only believe in it insofar as its capacity to make them more powerful or more comfortable. As a great philosopher once said, the dichotomy is crazy. Even though really, dichotomy only really refers to two opposing ideas, and I just listed like 4 things, but the last thing is so inextricably separate from the other 3 things, because really, whenever you think about it, what we're talking about here is believing in something versus not believing in something. In my view, that is what separates a good, well-rounded, complete human being from everything else. You can either participate in the human experience, be curious, empathize, and understand the world around you and the other things that inhabit it, or you could be a selfish shell of a person who is only really motivated by their own ego and power, taking advantage of other people's shortcomings and emotions to make yourself more comfortable. And that can manifest in, many different ways. Let's walk through an example, actually. How about that? Say that there's this guy, this very selfish, ego-driven, lust for power and control, all that. This guy amasses quite a bit of power and wealth off the backs of people less fortunate than him, and seeks to consolidate his power, wealth, and influence behind something like, say, the state or the economy. With that larger scale comes proportional harm. Before, they were able to sweep it all under the rug, but now the problems that they cause and the resources that they extract from the rest of us are a little harder to ignore. So they need a distraction so that people that they depend on to maintain their status don't do anything crazy, like, I don't know, revolt or something. This hypothetical person will more than likely do 2 things. 1, continue to consolidate their power and surround themselves with sycophants and put loyalists in positions of power and promise them, wealth and comfort. And 2, identify an outgroup or aberrant behavior of some kind. Usually it's a racial, ethnic, or religious or cultural minority that they can then shift blame to, using all of that institutional power and influence to systemically oppress and persecute that scapegoat while simultaneously pushing the narrative in which that same group is also the greatest threat to public safety and prosperity. So the funny part is what I just described could either be the plot of this new season of Daredevil, or it could also be... There we go. There is a very human urge to tell stories over and over again about the dangers of these ideologies and people like this. We can't prevent people like this from existing, since there will always be these selfish, immoral, volatile people. You just need to have faith and believe that these institutions, systems of power, and societal structures put people like this at a disadvantage and discourage others from acting like them. You would think that, wouldn't you? That's part of the thesis of Daredevil, Born Again specifically. It's a fun way to explore a prevalent theme of belief that has been a part of this character for so many decades. That idea of how far you're willing to go for what you believe in, and what happens when that thing you believe in either doesn't live up to your expectations, or, the mask slips and you realize how it's taking advantage of you. Every character in this ensemble gives us a look at how different people on different paths through life navigate these challenges. I mean, we already have 4 other seasons of television already exploring why Matt Murdock believes what he believes, and how that's changed over the years, and why Wilson Fisk does what he does and how he justifies it to himself. But what this season does so well is give us a different perspective through the supporting characters around our main characters. Take Daniel, for example. We know that Fisk values loyalty, as any ego-driven, megalomaniac does. So when faced with someone who is so earnest and buys into this cult of personality, of course, that is a person that he wants on his team. Because for Fisk and other authoritarians like him, it doesn't matter how competent or capable Daniel is, because really, someone like Daniel is just a means to an end meant to stroke his ego and help him exert control over other people to make himself feel better. So much of the front half of the season is dedicated to these lines being drawn with loyalty testing in the Fisk administration that, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, are very clear parallels to the Trump administration. However, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is something that the Trump administration invented wholesale. The prioritization of loyalty over competence is something that a lot of fascist regimes have done throughout history. This playbook is pretty old. I say this because while there are lines to be drawn between Fisk as mayor and Donald Trump as president, it's not one-to-one, of course. Fisk is a petulant, overly emotional, melodramatic man-child who actually can be intimidating, make threats, and back them up with some level of, cunning and, of course, physical strength. Whereas Donald Trump is a petulant, overly emotional, melodramatic man-child who is about as intimidating as a housefly and has a brain made of soup. So, they're cut from the same cloth, but they're not the same person. But something that both of them do have in common is this ability to take advantage of their status and their power and the auspices that it gives them to take what they want from regular people and use those auspices as justification for the awful things that they do and enable. Ego, cultivating a cult of personality, and loyalty are really important to them because it's a guarantee that once the harmful things that they do start to rear their heads, they have the means to insulate themselves from a democracy that turns against them. And in the meantime, they can use what power they've accumulated to, rape and pillage the city or the country for everything that it's worth. That's also where Mr. Charles and the CIA come in. They want to be able to continue their shady dealings globally, so they take advantage of the free port status of Red Hook and cheap labor to move weapons and equipment through New York City and around to these different hotspots, and use Fisk's administration's hate boner against vigilantes and enhanced people to help their efforts in sort of controlling or maybe even culling that population before it becomes a problem. Again, it's all in an effort to obfuscate and insulate those in power from scrutiny or consequences. It's a tale as old as time, a song as old as rhyme. It's older than the hills. And remember what I said about the consolidation of power? Loyalty is very important in this step, since you want loyalists in positions of authority and power next to you. Like, for instance, a high-profile doctor who has spent their career kind of studying a certain group of people and a certain mindset, who has a bias against that group of people, might come in handy if you're trying to push a narrative that demonizes them. It doesn't matter if what they're saying is true or not. They have a title and seniority. Heather Glenn is what you get whenever someone in a vulnerable emotional position is negatively polarized against an entire group of people based on one negative or, even traumatic experience, to be fair, with one person. Muse was obviously a very unwell and dangerous person that meant to do Heather harm. But she has taken that to mean that everyone who wears a mask or a costume or has an alter ego has to be that way as well. And Fisk knows exactly what he's doing, recruiting her to be part of his administration. Fisk wants to paint an entire group of people as dangerous and a public threat, when in reality, he just finds them personally threatening, and they make a good scapegoat. So what better way to get the public on his side than to recruit someone with a very strong bias against that group who has a PhD, so that they can use that air of academia and rationality to justify his pogrom, I guess you could say, to eliminate them from public life, if you will.
Objection. This is baseless speculation, Your Honors.
Well, this is the clinical report of a respected psychiatrist, Your Honors. Do I need to remind the defense that Dr. Glenn has extensive first-hand experience with these kinds of violent killers?
And of course, this extends to the justice system, something that Daredevil as a character is no stranger to criticizing, of course. All of this consolidation of power and influence means that the regime and their law enforcement apparatus can use that apparent mandate to do whatever. Pair that with any number of nebulous or inconsistent criteria for what constitutes an enemy of the state. And And then the next thing you know, that law enforcement apparatus is rounding up or detaining anybody that the powers that be don't like for any reason. The mandate and the power at some point just goes to their heads. They feel like they can do nothing wrong as long as they are loyal to the state, because the state always has the people's best interests at heart, right? Like, this is all classic, death of the empire stuff. Less of an emphasis is put on actual competence, and the institutions themselves start to corrode. It leads to a Daniel Blake, deputy mayor of communications, having a huge leak that then leads to a huge PR disaster. It's what leads to something like a Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino insanely mishandling their untrained federal agents murdering US citizens in Minneapolis. Fuck, it's how you get, like, Caligula wanting to appoint his favorite horse to a high office in the Senate. It's the cracks in the armor that start to show. I keep going back to the bodega scene in episode 2 as a really good example of this. It perfectly illustrates how terrifying it can be that these flimsy narratives built by the fascist and the state-sponsored media make it easier for any officer of the law to kind of just throw out some kind of half-assed justification for why it's okay for them to brutalize, detain, and then throw people in a hole with no due process. Saying that the bodega owner was taking the law into his own hands, which makes him a vigilante, just shows how easy it is to just open the door to indiscriminately abusing their power to harm anyone that they please. And of course, while it's not, exactly the same, it's the same logic that the IDF or ICE or police all over the country use to just antagonize people. People who incidentally always seem to be people of color or, belong to any number of marginalized groups. Weird how that happens, weird how that pans out, how that shakes out. And that look the officer gives to Soledad before crying, assaulting an officer, is the same look that you will see on any fanatically racist, transphobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, insert bigotry here, ICE officer, police officer, IDF soldier, West Bank settler, whatever it is. I can see how it can be a little too real for people, but it is also something that Marvel Comics and comic books in general have just kind of done for the entirety of their existence. Whether it's Nazi-occupied Europe or the Jim Crow South or modern Christo-fascist light America, it's exactly how these regimes obfuscate their intentions to the point where a lot of people don't bat an eye or speak up whenever they start rounding up people. It's how you get gulags, it's how you get Camp X-Ray or Alligator Alcatraz or Red Hook. The places where people go to be disappeared, which is why it's so important to show people examples and make people aware, and it's something that comic books have done literally since their inception. Which brings me to another elephant in the room. I do wish that the producers and writers of the show would actually take some responsibility as storytellers and own up to the parallels. Like I've pointed out, this playbook that Fisk is pulling from is nothing new, but it doesn't mean that, drawing parallels to what's happening in real life is without merit, both as it relates to, like, the tendencies of fascists and authoritarians, but also as it pertains to Marvel Comics having plenty to say over the decades about the politics of the time, the social injustices of the time. But saying that the parallels being this strong might hinder the escapism that a lot of people gravitate to is kind of bogus when you think about it. Because there's plenty of escapism here. The escapism comes from watching a version of what's happening in real life and following these interesting characters as they actually do something about it. It's obvious that whatever they say is just a PR thing trying to say, oh no, if you like ICE, you're a Republican, you can still like the show, we promise, guys, come on. Which, I'm sorry, but if you are any of those things or anything adjacent to it, this stuff isn't for you. And not owning up to that, it's a bit cowardly. Like, Dario, my man, you said it yourself that this is not a new thing with Marvel properties, and Daredevil is one of those characters who is just very well positioned to tell stories like this about real issues. You don't get to play in that sandbox and then after the fact say something about not wanting to alienate the people that the work is criticizing. Because it's kind of criticizing them for being unironically evil. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, anyone who is put off by any of this or offended by any of it should be be alienated. I don't care if you're offended that the show is indirectly like criticizing or demonizing ICE or the GOP or Trump, because if you are in a position where you are getting offended for them, this stuff isn't for you. If you are one of those people, you don't get to claim Daredevil or Spider-Man or Batman or Superman, and you especially do not get to claim the Punisher or Luke Cage. Let the rest of us have fun with our escapist fantasy of Daredevil breaking into an ICE detention facility, freeing unlawfully detained citizens and brutalizing ICE agents. That's the escapism, and that is what Marvel has just always done. And on that note, another aspect of the escapism is the stylistic and technical aspects of the show. There's very strong visual language to this show. Like I've pointed out many times in previous videos, the show's camera language takes a lot of cues from comic books. Specifically, there's a lot of David Mazzucchelli and Marco Cacchetto. However, it's not an imitation of their styles. It builds upon it, and it uses the advantage that this version of Daredevil has over those others. That being that verisimilitude that you get from the medium of film and television. Sure, Matt Murdock gets hurt and exhausted in the comics all the time, but it has to be represented in such an illustrative way, of course, being an illustration. Every aspect of that scene and that composition has to be drawn by an artist, and with that comes more of an expectation of artificiality in a way. But that same composition on film has to be staged with real people and real things in a real environment. And when Matt Murdock is hurt or exhausted, instead of an illustrator drawing what they think Matt being exhausted would look like in their style through the lens of any given character's perspective, Charlie Cox has to act hurt or exhausted based on his lived experience and understanding as a real human being, and the director and the cinematographer have to capture that on camera on a set designed by a production design team who also draws upon their lives and experience and knowledge as real human beings living in the real world. It just makes it all feel so much more tangible and real. And the same goes for the narrative, specifically how the narrative can reflect the real world, even when it's through this hyper-realistic lens. This whole thing is obviously borrowing a lot from Charles Soule, Mayor Fisk run of Daredevil, but taking the broad strokes of that story and grounding it more in the reality of the MCU's version and the context of what came before with the Netflix show, it allows it to feel so much more real. It makes it feel less like a strictly superhero-focused procedural drama about a supervillain getting elected as mayor, and more like a character-driven political story about a militantly anti-fascist resistance cell made up of people who have been unlawfully and unjustifiably persecuted, waging an asymmetrical war against an authoritarian regime. Wait, hold on, what's this Wolfenstein footage doing here? Exploring the corrupting nature of extremist conservative ideologies, the human cost of resistance, and how necessary it is to build a better future. Kind of like another critically acclaimed show on Disney Plus that happens to, belong to another big franchise. Or this animated movie that came out a few years ago that happens to also belong to another big franchise. And that, seeing people actually do something and take action, that again is the escapism. It's so fun to watch. That's what the entirety of episode 3 is dedicated to. It's this really protracted buildup to the aforementioned infiltration of what is essentially an ICE detention facility and forcefully breaking out some unlawfully detained citizens. It's the season's obligatory, one-er action sequence, of course, as well. And man, is it a good one. It's so fun and kinetic, and it does enough to set itself apart from the other one-ers of seasons past. Usually when Matt goes into these situations that become the one-er, he is always on the back foot. The first one-er in season 1 of the original show, he's injured. He's not operating at full capacity. But of course, he has to see it through. Despite Claire's protests and warnings, he has to go and save that boy. Season 2, Frank is the one who put him in that situation with the bikers in the apartment complex, with a physical handicap as well, with, the gun duct taped to his hand. Season 3, he obviously wasn't expecting to incite a riot in the prison. I'm sure that he wasn't 100% sure on how he was going to exit the prison once he got in, but I'm sure he wasn't counting on that. But here, this is actually a situation where Matt makes the decision. He went into Red Hook with, a slightly different objective, sure, but he made that decision. He's going into this one in an active role. It flips the usual conventions of the oneer on its head, because usually during a oneer, Matt is pushing through the fatigue and it's very defensive, but here he is on the offensive. He's more in control of the situation, which comes through in the way that the sequence is staged and choreographed. It's very kinetic and controlled. It's a new way to play with, what we expect from the show, but not in an overly subversive way. And that is an aspect that is present throughout the season. Like I said in my last video, it feels like an evolution of the show that we love. Another way that Born Again sets itself apart from the original run is the way that it focuses more on the supporting characters around our David and Goliath, our Dante and Virgil, Optimus Prime and Megatron, Snake Eyes Storm Shadow, Guts and Griffith, Tom and Jerry, Matt Murdock, and Wilson Fisk. Obviously, that's not to say that the original run didn't focus on supporting characters for good chunks of their runtime. I see you people trying to come up with something to criticize the show for, talking about, Matt Murdock's screen time. I would like you to look at the average screen time from previous seasons as well. Fake fans, I see you. But when we would focus on someone like Ben Urich for a while in that first season, it was more of a way to explore the world of MCU New York, with more of a focus on how these conflicts impact other people, as opposed to Born Again, which uses those supporting characters to focus more on the contrast between these two figures by showing us sort of mechanics of their relationships with other people. And of course, especially their relationships with their respective partners. There is a stark difference between Matt and Karen versus Wilson Fisk and Vanessa. And it's a really staggering reminder of how power and the pursuit of that power is completely corrupting. When Fisk asks Vanessa if she thinks that they can thrive outside of all of this, the politics, the crime, conspiracy, she says that she has to believe that they can. And I think that that says everything you need to know about them. We've known for a while now that Vanessa is just kind of enamored with the thrill of it all. And with Wilson being so endlessly hungry for more, he will continue to supply that thrill. He is almost exclusively driven by his hunger for power and his emotional attachment to that power, and it makes it hard to imagine a scenario in which he could ever be content to just chill the hell out and be happy with what he has already, including Vanessa. So it becomes this feedback loop where it feels like the only thing keeping them together is the prospect of their empire that they've built. She keeps talking about an heir and the potential for a more global reach, showing that she too wants it to go on so that they can keep this little thrill game going. I mean, it's why she had Foggy killed, right? He was about to unearth something that would have stopped this whole Red Hook business dead in its tracks. And she knew that that was the mechanism by which her and Wilson's little empire would open up to a larger, more global scale, thus prolonging their little game that they play with each other. But contrast that with Matt and Karen. Matt and Karen spend so much time talking about the places that they'd like to go and enjoy in each other's company, reminiscing on good times that they've had outside of any vigilante, superhero, underground resistance antics. It is not the thing holding them together. Every conversation doesn't have to be centered around it. It further drives home the idea that Wilson Fisk only really believes in power and its capacity to satisfy his ego and make himself more comfortable. And Matt Murdock, despite his flaws, and despite any mistakes that he's made in the past, looking at you, season 2 and 3, Matt, he believes in love and empathy and its ability to foster actual connections with people. And even that was something that he struggled with for a long time, but now he's taken those lessons and learned. I feel like I've mentioned this specifically in every video I've done on Daredevil, but Foggy's death it continues to be such a big sticking point for some people, and I just don't get calling it unearned or calling it a cheap move. As far as inciting incidents go, I think that our hero's best friend, who was foundational to the person that he is pretty compelling. And really, there's no beating around the bush. Foggy's death and that haunting of the narrative gave us one of the best episodes of TV in a long time. One of the most well-realized pieces of recursive storytelling in any long-running narrative. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I am an absolute slut. I'm a whore for recursive narratives. Episode 5 is this masterfully constructed love letter to the past. that connects Born Again to the mythology of what came before, while also kind of recontextualizing that past through this wonderful dialogue between these past and present timelines, revisiting and reinforcing just how much Foggy meant to Matt and how foundational their relationship was to who Matt is. We get to go back and see how early in their careers, Foggy was such a strong moral compass for Matt, believing so strongly in doing the right thing and doing the most that you can do to help and forgive people, showing them grace. Intercut with Matt's struggle to save Dex from the AVTF and bring himself to show Dex that grace even after he took that Northern Star away from him. And of course, Dex, being who he is, can't help but point out the irony in all of this, but he doesn't know, nor could he ever understand why Matt does what he does. The only thing that he understands is himself, and what he is selfish. This characterization of Bullseye has got to be one of the more interesting ones ever written. He is so preoccupied with how he feels about himself and how he wants to see himself. After years of not having his mind to himself, now fully cognizant of the fact that he has helped bad people do bad things and done a lot of bad things himself, he wants to make amends. Now that he is his own independent actor in all of this, having that clarity, it unchains him, but it doesn't make him a good guy.
Oh, don't worry. I'm one of the good guys.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he is just a fundamentally broken person. Take, for instance, the scene where Matt is expressing that grief that Dex inflicted upon him by taking Foggy away from him. Wilson Bethel does this amazing job at making it seem like Dex is trying so hard to understand that grief, because he kind of understands that it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do to empathize with someone.
Yeah.
But that's just not his forte. But what his forte is violence, which Matt knows. So he gives him an opportunity to use that for something good by, going and saving the governor from Fisk's assassin, which he just revels in, of course. Makes him feel like he's actually doing something good for a change. And we get to see what it looks like when he's giddy, I guess. Giddy about finally doing something right, even if it's, a weird fucked up way, or, like sliming some greasy, dirty cops, or murdering Vanessa, or even being a-okay with Karen wanting to, blow his brains out. And that right there is another great example of how he is a great foil to Matt. It further exposes something that we've already talked about. Matt and Karen, in spite of their flaws and differences, have a very strong connection and relationship. Seeing Dex again under these circumstances after, Father Lantham, Agent Nadim, and of course Foggy, is the ultimate stress test for their relationship. They have to not be afraid to call each other out on their bullshit. Karen is rightfully upset that Matt just won't let her carry that weight of killing Dex for him, but Matt has to remind her that this is not what Foggy would have wanted. He has to remind her that Foggy believed in grace and mercy and wouldn't want her to carry that weight for either of them. It would be better to just believe in grace and let it go. A lesson that Fisk could never learn, and that is what separates them from Fisk, which further suggests that the paths that Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk are on are kind of inversions of one another. Matt, after losing Foggy and Karen, stumbled for like a year when he tried to pursue a different life that just was not for him. But through this new chapter of his Born Again saga, he is reconnecting with that past and that life that was taken away from him, remembering those lessons and coming out a stronger version of himself, reinforced by those virtues that he learned from that Northern Star that was Foggy, which in a meta way is, kind of the mission statement of the second season of Born Again, because as we all know, that first season was kind of Frankenstein together from like a new creative vision that was entirely divorced from the original run, and a new creative vision that was more embracing the mythology of what came before. But Fisk, after a time of seemingly going on a, straighter and narrower path, finding love and attempting to be something else, he loses Vanessa, and instead of carrying forward any lessons that relationship or any relationship might have taught him about temperance or, rationality, he starts regressing. Take, for example, in episode 5, the Bitcoin line.
Are you familiar with Bitcoin? In light of the Russians, we should start diversifying.
It isn't just there for the audience to kind of chuckle at and remember that we're like back in like 2014, 2015. You know, if the shift back to 69 and the color palette and the crushed blacks and the, you know, return of the 70s style neo-noir camera language wasn't enough. The Bitcoin line is there to reinforce the idea that Fisk has always been very hungry and that he is very impulsive, and he jumps at anything that he thinks might enrich him or stroke his ego, no matter how volatile it may seem, or how volatile of a state he is in. It's also there to remind us that Wesley, like Vanessa after him, was kind of a voice of reason, a force of temperance that kept him afloat and kept him from imploding. We've already seen what happened after he lost Wesley back in season 1, and ever since then, he has done so many things that in hindsight, Wesley would have never suggested he did. And not remembering any of the lessons that Wesley taught him has just gotten him into increasingly more volatile situations. Like, Wesley would have never suggested that he run for office. So what happens when he, the emotionally volatile man that he is, loses that temperance again and is left alone in this insanely volatile circumstance? Well, I mean, to put it plainly, he kind of loses it. I mean, murdering the surgeon kind of smacks of him killing Anatoly way back in season 1 of the Netflix show for interrupting his first date with Vanessa, I'm sure everyone remembers that. And D'Onofrio gives us these really interesting cues during his process of losing Vanessa, pointing back to the previous characterization of Fisk, the twitching, the voice breaks. He's regressing really hard, and it can only mean that he's going to make some irrational decisions. I mean, he starts out by just thinking that he can fleece his federal government benefactors, and he puts even more pressure on his loyalists and more pressure on the city with the AVTF, which in turn puts some pressure on old Charles, which is why he sends some lackeys to Jessica Jones's home. We know that the work that Fisk's administration has been doing with the Safer Streets initiative as it pertains to like vigilantes and enhanced people and masked criminals in New York is really important to, you know, whatever Charles, Val, and the CIA are doing. They're not just interested in, you know, how it can help their global meddling, regime change, color revolution abroad stuff. They obviously want to use whatever edge that they can to get ahead of the uptick in individuals who may or may not have enhanced abilities and powers.
After you called, I did some digging, found out who's been running guns with Fisk and giving him all this cover. Turns out, a while ago, Sky called, obviously agency. He was interested in people like us. Charles is mighty cozy with Mayor Fisk.
And judging by the way people who fall into this category have been treated thus far, you know, systemic oppression, persecution, blackmailing and coercion and stuff, I think we all know where this is pointing. I mean, this is Marvel we're talking about. Superheroes as allegories for social injustices. It's something that the MCU has kind of sorely lacked since the beginning, since, you know, when this all started. They didn't have the X-Men. They legally were not allowed to use the word mutant or mutate. And mutants, like the X-Men, and mutates, like Spider-Man or Daredevil, were always associated with that. But with Mayor Fisk's crusade against vigilantes and enhanced individuals, masked people, whatever, the way he uses people like Hochberg or Heather to twist the justice system and public perception against these people, it just feels like classic Marvel. It points to the idea that, you know, from this point forward, we're gonna probably see more and more enhanced individuals be referred to as mutants or mutates. We even get the M word drop in the Brand New Day trailer in reference to Spider-Man.
If DNA is mutating, it would be enormously dangerous.
And government agencies are not going to be very discerning about whether or not these people were born with these abilities and abnormalities, or if it was a genetically modified spider bite or exposure to strange chemicals or radiation or a super soldier serum. And honestly, what better way to try and introduce us to it than through a show about a character that regularly interacts with both the justice system and the extrajudicial world of superheroism. It gives us an intimate look at how these prejudices infect these institutions, how the fervor in those people who hold those bigotries, who are the vectors for that infection, can become divorced from their humanity, which in turn makes the situation even more volatile. I mean, what happens to people being persecuted and what happens to the people caught in the middle? And that's where Bibi and Daniel fit into all of this.
Well,
I've seen a lot of people be like, oh, now we have to deal with Daniel and Bibi in the show. I just want to see Daredevil. You don't have to deal with it. You get to deal with it. This is a very important part of the show. And it just, suggests to me that these people don't watch these things. They just kind of on their phone, I guess. I don't know. Daniel put his faith in this whole Mayor Fisk thing because, in his eyes, it was just kind of cool and maverick, and his loyalty to it gained him some comfort, but, at some point, you have to kind of reckon with the horse you hitched your carriage to, and this horse requires some very, very specific maintenance that he is obviously not capable of following through with. It's like how people in real life, there's a tendency to hitch themselves to ideologies that in the short term offer some kind of creature comfort, gratification, or, satisfy some grievance that they have. But once the mechanisms behind that key jangling become apparent, they say, oh, I didn't sign up for this, I didn't vote for this. And, that is the price of not really believing in anything. Being loyal, first and foremost, to the person who is right in front of you at any given time can work to a point, but when stakes are this high, being a likable schmuck is only gonna do so much for you. As we see with his interactions with Buck, he ingratiates himself with Buck by being himself. Buck does grow to genuinely like him, but when push comes to shove, Buck knows the score. He's worked with Fisk for way too long to know better. You can't let any personal feelings get in the way unless they're Fisk's personal feelings. It's why he tests him with disposing of Christofi's body, to make sure that he has the constitution to properly commit. To do something like this is the bare minimum of illegal and immoral conduct that a person like Wilson Fisk expects from him. Like Buck says to Daniel,
I like you, Daniel. I really do. But we work for a man who can change your life. Has changed your life. And all he asks in return is loyalty.
On the other side, you have Bibi. She, following in her uncle's footsteps, wants to speak truth to power, and at first, Daniel is the perfect schmuck to cozy up to in order to get on the inside of this corrupt thing. She does what she can to pull him away from it, since she knows what she's doing could absolutely hurt him. So Daniel is being pulled in two very different directions. We kind of lose sight of the fact that people like Daniel can just be people, and that's the whole point of, pulling both of them away from this politics game of City Hall and going on this little excursion to Staten Island to his mother's house and everything, to remind us and the characters that they aren't just tools for each other to, kind of help further their careers. We and Bibi are both reminded that Daniel is just a dude. He's just a young guy who saw an opportunity and a career path and took it. He's not motivated by any real animus or hatred. Like a lot of young men, he just kind of fell into a dangerous pipeline. Buzzword. I mean, it doesn't excuse the things that he's done or, the basket that he decided to put his eggs in, but he knows that. He kind of comes to realize that, which is a revelation that a lot of people don't come to in real life, unfortunately. None of these associations make it any less painful whenever a life that could have been turned around so easily is just kind of snuffed out, and a friendship is violently ended, all because of one very evil man preying on people less fortunate than him and who have more humanity than him. To reiterate the whole recurring motif of inverted journeys, we watch as Daniel gets in touch with his humanity and faces the consequences of what he's involved himself in. Meanwhile, Heather becomes so divorced from her humanity as the season goes on that she kind of lets her paranoia metastasize into such a deep animus for an entire group of people. This fixation that she has just festers and completely takes over not only her personal life, but her professional life as well. It's kind of a parallel to, what happens when these extreme socially conservative ideologies, insert phobia here, get into people's heads. Before you know it, every waking thought is dedicated to how these people might harm you, and every interaction with another human being is about sussing out whether or not this person you're talking to is a member of that group or is sympathetic to them. It's antisocial and antithetical to being human. It destroys a person, and it is precisely what's happening to Heather and so many people in real life. Some people might even let this same thing lead them to abandoning their principles and even giving up their own civil rights if it means hurting those people. Or, maybe you could, put on the mask of the serial killer who tried to murder you because it makes you feel closer to and in more control of the thing that almost killed you and scares you.
You know what I think? I know that Matt, that mystery beside me, loves me in a way that makes every contradiction, every conflict in him and in me a part of us. And I'm willing to bet that that's the part that you can't really understand.
I think that the joke in all of this is the idea that the fascist, the tyrant, the bigot, or whatever it is, can only hold on to a flimsy facsimile of humanity. Vanessa and Wilson, Matt's attempt at a relationship with Heather, hell, even Dex back in season 3 of the original show, fully buying into Fisk, thinking that he's taken him under his wing and genuinely was looking out for him. It's that sociopathic tendency to identify and exploit other people's weaknesses and their most base lizard brain desires or grievances. But once you've outlived your usefulness...
What is falling as orders gonna do for you? How long till you're on the floor with a gun pointed at your head?
How long until you're the one bleeding on the floor? How long until you're the one with the gun to their head? How long until you become something that's barely recognizable as human? You gotta have something to believe in, because you'll either be like Buck and be forced to snuff out any light that comes your way, or you'll be Heather and become just a different brand of the thing that you hate. And then there's Dex, then there's Bullseye. Even if he had to do some bad things to get to this point, at least he understands himself, and that's something that people like Buck and Heather can only pretend at. It's why Buck has that scene where he's trying to, rationalize to Heather his place in all of this. He's trying to preemptively justify to himself anything that he might have to do to maintain his position, since really, he has no sense of identity or belief onto himself besides his place by Fisk's side and his skill set, just like how all that Heather has at this point is her hatred. At least Bullseye found a sense of purpose in doing good and balancing his karmic scales, as warped and selfish as, his perception of good may be. He still found himself and understands himself. Better to find yourself too late and face the music with some dignity, like what Daniel does. And it's no coincidence that happens right before Matt comes to that exact same conclusion himself.
You are a fool. No, I'm not. I am Daredevil.
Tony Stark built this in a cave. Tony Stark revealed his identity as a way to boost his ego. Spider-Man's identity was revealed against his will, and Matt Murdock reveals his identity for the greater good of New York. And he makes a sacrifice in the name of real justice, because that's what he believes in. It was the only way to save Karen, the woman that he loves, and New York, the city that he loves, from this poison that he and Fisk have let inflict the city for too long. It is the long-awaited synthesis of Matt Murdock and Daredevil, just masterfully realized by Charlie Cox in this intense bombshell testimony that vengeful, guilt-driven crusader and the dutiful lawyer who believes in grace and mercy finally coming together in this cathartic release to finally assert his position as a righteous and moral actor in this conflict, even if it means that he has to face the consequences too. I mean, it's also what the red of the suit slowly revealing itself under the black over the course of the season represents. When we first see the new black suit, it shows us a Daredevil who is operating in the darkness, underground and further outside the law. And as the season goes on, New York becomes even more aware of what Fisk and the AVTF are doing. The city rallies around Daredevil, and not only the light of the city's mandate shines on him, but it can also be read as the light being shown on his resolve, that there's now a clarity, a faith in his mission. It's just a neat little bit of visual storytelling. And plus, it's nice to watch a story unfold where, morally good individual action can actually outweigh material conditions. Sometimes you need stories like this where the systems work the way that they are kind of intended to. With the walls closing in on Fisk, the weight of this very volatile situation he's gotten himself into is kind of settling in, and that regression D'Onofrio has been giving us hints at takes hold in a rather explosive manner.
Open it! Open that door!
Genuinely the most terrifying an MCU villain has been since Wilson Fisk turned Anatoly's head into bolognese with that car door. Not only is that terrifyingly volatile kingpin coming out again. Thematically, it also is kind of a representation of that systemic violence that people like Fisk inflict on the people below them. He's cutting out the middleman and just murdering them with his bare hands instead of, starving them or making their lives more difficult through boring legislation or whatever. And that final confrontation in the atrium of the courthouse mirrors that last moment in the very first episode of Born Again. This whole Mayor Fisk saga started with Fisk winning the election, the light of that mandate shining up at him while he looks down from his ivory tower with Matt Murdock standing alone, knowing he's up there looking down on him as just another face in the crowd. And it ends with Fisk all alone up on that balcony, bloodied and exasperated, while Matt stands confident and composed with an army ready to finally take him down, which of course is also delivering on that promise that was made at the end of season 1 of Daredevil's resistance building an army, strong enough and dedicated enough to depose Fisk. The people of New York are rightfully angry and want his head on a spike. So the crowd does overpower him with the intent to kill him. However, that is not what Daredevil is about. That's not what Matt Murdock believes in, which, makes him a better man than me, makes him more godly than me, but you know what? That's fine. I digress. That's kind of the point of the character and, point of the show. Matt knows what it's like to deal with his symbol and iconography being used for something that he doesn't stand for. Through what happened with Dex back in season 3 of the Netflix era, and through Frank seeing the AVTF adopt the Punisher's iconography, he can't let this crowd of rightfully angry New Yorkers wearing his symbol kill Fisk. So he steps in and he remembers that lesson of mercy that Foggy taught him all those years ago. And just like with Dex, he offers Fisk grace. Instead of screaming in his face and reveling in his defeat like at the end of season 3, Matt unmasks himself and gets down on Fisk's level and shows him grace. He empathizes with him. It's the only way to finally stop this poison of their conflict from spreading like it has all these years. They both just have to step away and give the city peace, ultimately exiling themselves. Fisk ends up back on that island, which release those flight logs. I want to see them. That paradise that he once shared with Vanessa, this time all alone, far away from the city that he loves, seemingly free, but really trapped by his emotions with no outlet for those emotions. Nothing to control, nothing to lose or gain. But Matt, of course, is, arrested and incarcerated. The polar opposite of Fisk's seemingly idyllic exile, stuck in a box where he has nothing to do but pay penance and repent. With the hint of a smile, he lets us know that, for someone like him, there's peace in this. Matt is ushered to his cell and the door shuts. And the window of the cell door, like the sliding window of a confessional, closes. And that's the end of season 2 of Born Again, or season 5 of Daredevil, whatever you want to call it. Suffice it to say, I think that Daredevil Born Again Season 2 is a really well-constructed and executed season of TV. It gets damn near close to the level of those first and third seasons of the original show. I really hope that this video serves as a good guide for helping people better understand the nuance that can be found in this season. Because I do see a lot of takes from people who are being really obtuse about some of this stuff, and it just really bothers me. It bothers me so much whenever people pretend that they are warriors for better storytelling or whatever, and in reality they don't really want things to be better. They just want things to cater to their tastes and their tastes only. And when you do that, when you approach things from that angle, so much of what makes a work of art worthwhile gets buried underneath these weird cynical vibes-based criticisms. And I think that the landscape of the discourse would be a lot healthier if people just admitted when something isn't for them more often. Also, if they stop belittling and insulting people for liking what they like, that'd be great too. I get it. It's infinitely harder to sit down and think through and articulate why you like something and to venerate the beauty in it. But venerating the craftsmanship and beauty in something is, it's just a very pro-human, even pro-labor sentiment, even if it's something commercial, like a silly TV show about a blind lawyer superhero. To those people, I just say, gain some perspective, develop a strong theory of mind, and approach things with curiosity, and don't be a freak.